It's great to see you guys. Welcome to Mission Online. My name is John, and right now we're in a teaching series called Forced Perspective. This is the third and final week. We're recording these from the Bricks, this amazing wedding venue, and it's a place, as you would expect, where a lot of photography takes place. And the idea of this teaching series called Forced Perspective comes from these photos that have been trending online. Perhaps you've seen them on Facebook. Maybe you've seen them on Instagram. And what a forced perspective picture is it's when you take something that's smaller and you bring it to the foreground, which causes an illusion to take place, that being that which is actually larger going to the background that then appears smaller. And you guys have been sending in some amazing forced perspective images, and I want to highlight a few of those. This first one is from Sonia, and this is an amazing one. It was taken at Stonehenge. Not sure when you took that one, but great job, so creative. This next one is from the Grant family. They're actually my neighbors. Love you guys. Awesome picture, super cute. Just two more to highlight. These last two are from Tommy Bowman and his family. These are so fun. How about that? Tommy's, I know he's powerful, but holy cow, like blowing his family over with his breath. Coffee breath can do that. The last one is of his youngest son, Aslan, eating him, and this just cracks me up. This is so creative, so well done. So bravo to all of you who have sent in your images. And we've just been having fun with this. You know, we've had time on our hands, and so we've been sending in those pictures. But forced perspective is not just a thing we're talking about from a photography standpoint, but when it comes to our life. Because right now, God is teaching us a lot in the midst of what I've been calling this sovereign pause. And one of the things that he's been teaching us is revealing smaller things that we've allowed to come to the foreground, appearing larger. Things such as earth, appearing much larger than that of eternity. That was week one. And we just agreed that eternity is a lot longer and a lot bigger than our time on earth. Last week was the comparison of our pain and God's promise. And we just agreed that we're going to allow God's promise to come to the foreground, to be larger because it is. And today, to wrap up this series, I want to talk about something that I feel like is so timely and it's very personal. And that is for you and I to right now be as honest as we can, to really ask the question, whose voice have you allowed to come to the foreground? And whose voice, and maybe it's accidental, is now going to the background? Is the voice of the crowd appearing larger and louder? Is the voice of your Creator now seeming to get quieter and quieter and quieter and smaller? I think this is one of the most important questions we can ask right now. Whose voice in your life is larger and louder? There's a story that comes to mind, and it's from an Old Testament book of 1 Kings chapter 19. In 1 Kings chapter 19, we're introduced to a person by the name of Elijah. Elijah is a super prophet. He's one of the heroes of our faith. And in 1 Kings 19, he's in the wilderness. And he's in the wilderness not because he necessarily would like to be in the wilderness. The wilderness oftentimes in the Bible is a metaphor for a place that you're sometimes sent to, but it's a place generally you don't choose to go to. The wilderness is a place where you learn quite a bit. The wilderness is a place where God becomes the teacher and we again become the student, where God's voice gets louder and louder and our voice gets a little quieter and quieter, and we learn something. The wilderness in the Bible oftentimes depicts people that enter the wilderness one way, but they exit the wilderness in a much better way, in a transformed way. And this is certainly true of Elijah. He enters the wilderness knowing how to push, knowing how to have zeal, knowing how to grind. You could say that Elijah's mantra for his life may have been rise and grind. I mean, he knew how to work, he knew how to push, he knew how to grind, but what he didn't really know how to do was to rest, wait, and listen. And he was about to get a 401 level education in the wilderness of how to rest, wait, and listen. Notice I didn't say stop, collaborate, and listen. That's from a whole different story. But to rest, wait, and listen. And it's in the wilderness when Elijah, he learns how to do these things. It says this in 1 Kings 19, that there as Elijah was waiting to hear from God, it says that first this mighty wind came through. And at first you might think that that was God showing up in the might of the wind. Secondly, there was an earthquake. And then third, there was a fire. But God didn't come through those three very loud, very huge, very obvious things. No, those were familiar things already. When you understand the Old Testament, he had already experienced God in those things, in the mighty wind or in the earthquake or in the fire. But in this moment, in the wilderness, Elijah was about to experience God in a brand new way and in a much deeper way. It says this in 1 Kings 19, verse 12, "And after the fire came a gentle whisper." A gentle whisper. It's not that God hadn't been in those loud, huge, massive things before. No, he's been in those things and he'll be in those things. But in a very unique way in this moment, God was teaching Elijah something that he would never forget, and that is to understand and hear God's voice with even greater ability. I've got 2 daughters, and I so often learn about my faith just through them and by being a dad. And my girls, they certainly know my voice. They really do. We can be in all kinds of different places, and if I call out to them, they can decipher between my voice and everyone else's voice. And there's a reason for that. It's because of how much time we have spent in the quiet. Every morning, almost, if I'm home, and I'm home most mornings, even now at age 10 and 8, when they come downstairs, they come to me in my chair. They did it this morning, which was amazing, and they climb up into my chair, and I cuddle them, I hold them, and I speak to them. And I'm not shouting, I'm not loud, but I whisper to them. Sometimes I tell them jokes, sometimes I sing to them, sometimes I just tell them how beautiful they are, sometimes we just hang out. But there's a reason why they know my voice. It's because they've heard the whisper. They've been so close. They've spent time with me in the quiet. Right now is a sovereign pause. I'm not saying that God has caused this pandemic, but I believe to my core that he's allowed it. And I don't know about you, but for me, one of the great things that I'm learning right now is a greater understanding and a greater ability to hear the voice of God. God has been revealing how oftentimes for me, I've allowed other voices to come to the foreground and his voice has gone to the background. But what God is teaching me right now in the quiet is for his voice to be louder and for his voice to be closer, for me to hear his whisper, and his whisper literally then becomes a shout. If you hear one thing I say today, I want you to hear this. Don't waste the wilderness. Don't waste it. Now, this is a gift. It's something we would never have chosen on our own. We wouldn't have drawn it up this way. But you and I have the opportunity to exit the wilderness different than how we entered it. We can actually exit the wilderness with ears that are more tuned in to the voice of God. Why? Because we have learned how to hear him in the quiet. We've learned how to tune our ears to his whisper. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. I think it's important for you to understand, to not confuse the whisper of God with the weakness of God. No. His whisper is a shout. It says this in Psalm 29, verse 5, "The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars." This is how powerful God's voice is. "The Lord breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon." Perhaps you've allowed the crowd's voice to get louder, but in reality, it's a forced perspective. The loudest, and the most powerful, and the most mighty voice in human history is the very voice of God. Would you hear him today? Would you allow this sovereign pause to tune your ear to the voice of God? Something that has been honestly pretty tough for me. As I'm agreeing with what I'm trying to get you guys to agree with is don't waste the wilderness. There have been some moments, in fact, there's been some days where I've wasted them. I really have. And the days where I have wasted that day in the wilderness, it's because I have been scrambling and searching and longing to find the voice that knows what's going on. And man, I felt tension in this. I felt pulled in one way and pulled in the other. And there's been articles that I've come across and YouTube videos that I've come across, and I would watch those or I'd read those and be like, finally, here is someone that really knows, like what's going on and how we're going to get through this and how all this makes sense. And then hours or minutes later, someone would write another article or another YouTube that would completely dismiss what I had already read. And they would give even better stats and even better data and even better credentials. Man, and I have just backed up from the table so many times, frustrated and confused and wondering, whose voice can I really trust in the wilderness? There's a lot of voices in the wilderness. And it's not that all those voices are bad, and it's not that all those voices are misinformed. Some might be informed, but there is one voice in the wilderness that God wants you to listen to above any and all other voices, and that is the only voice that breaks the cedars. The only voice whose whisper is as powerful as a shout. It's the voice of God. And so for me, this has been so timely. For me, as I've asked the question, whose voice can I ultimately and fully trust? Here's where I've arrived. No one but one. No one but one. I can learn in certain places, but there is one voice ultimately that I can trust. It is the voice of Almighty God. It is the voice who speaks to you right now in a whisper, as all kinds of loud things have become muted. The loudness, the noise of sports, mute. The loudness, the noise of kids' sports, youth sports, mute. The loudness, the noise of traffic. You remember that? Rush hour. You remember that? Mute. The noise and the loudness of rushing to the next meeting, mute. The decibel level of every other voice is being turned down, so that the voice that we can trust completely would be turned up right now in the wilderness. Don't waste the wilderness. There's a story that I want to share with you that I recently heard that has really impacted me. It's an incredible story. In fact, I want to read this story to you. It's a story of a guy that was 24 years old. His name is Alan, and he had this fascination with flying a plane. And so he was in the process of getting his pilot's license. And so if you know how that process works, you ride in the plane for a while with, a pilot, and you're learning. And so he's 24 years old. He is there in the cockpit, but he's not flying it. No, the actual pilot is flying the plane. And so here's Alan in the cockpit with the pilot, and he's there to learn. But something happened that he never anticipated. You want to talk about a wilderness moment. As they were in the air, mid-flight, the pilot suddenly dies of a heart attack. He dies of a heart attack. And Alan, this 24-year-old, he gets onto the airwaves and he begins to call out a mayday signal. Mayday, mayday. He begins to explain what is taking place. And as he's calling out this mayday signal, immediately responding to that is an instructor. And this instructor was able to get into a plane and get up to where he was. In fact, it says that the instructor caught him at 2,000 feet. Just imagine this. You're not a pilot. You don't know what to do. You are thinking, surely I'm not going to make it out of this alive. And there you are at 2,000 feet, which, by the way, in the air isn't very high. And he looks out to his right, and he sees this instructor who has caught up to him. And this is where the story picks up. The first thing that Alan said when he saw the instructor is he said, okay, I need some help. He said, can you see me? And the instructor responded, oh, okay, I can see you. Listen to my instructions. Take the throttle and pull it slightly until the RPM drops down to about 2,300. Alan responded, well, which one's the throttle? The instructor replies, okay, there should be a black lever in the center of the panel. That's fine. Just let the airplane fly itself. Alan answered, I wish it would. The instructor said, now, read the airspeed. He said the airspeed is 105. Well, look out your right side. You can see me, the instructor said. Just relax. Alan said, are we going down? The instructor said, yes, we are shortly, but just bank gently to the right. We are aiming for that wide tarmac airstrip to the right of the red and white lights. Can you see it? Affirmative. Okay, reduce the power slightly. What's your airspeed now? It's about 100, Alan responded. Okay, we'll pull very gently onto the control column and then close the throttle and just hold it there. Pull very gently back and hold it there, hold it there, hold it there. And as he is now descending, about to hit the tarmac, he's saying, hold it there, hold it there, hold it there, hold it there. Hold the control column back. That's it, Alan, you're right there, that's it. Okay. He touched down safely until Alan then said to the instructor, I can't find the brakes. I can't find the brakes. And the instructor says, okay, don't worry. The emergency vehicles are just coming up behind you. Just sit in the aircraft and leave the engine rumbling. And now turn the keys to the off position and take them out. The engine should stop. Has it stopped? Alan says to the instructor, yes, the keys are out. It just stopped. Thank God. To that, the instructor replied, you're welcome. It's all in a day's work. Right now, we are experiencing something we've never experienced before. And I don't know who you are. I don't know where you've been. I don't know what you did last year or last night, but you're here right now. And I want to give two groups of you an opportunity to respond to the message today. Some of you, you are acknowledging for the first time in your life that you're lost and that you need help. You're lost and you need help. This is the truth of humanity forever. We have always needed an instructor, that being Jesus Christ, to come to our rescue. And some of you right now, because of this wilderness experience, you're feeling the reality that you're lost. And if that's you, I want to give you the invitation right now to just own that, to admit that. Can you imagine if Alan, the 24-year-old, would have just tried to just handle it himself? Can you imagine if he would have just said, no thanks for the help, I'm going to figure this thing out? And that's some of you right now. And I'm praying, and we're praying that instead of you saying, I'm going to figure this thing out called life, that you would say, no, in humility and in wisdom and in courage, I need an instructor. I need help. Mayday, mayday, mayday. And when you call out and cry out mayday, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, will come immediately to where you are. He will match you right where you are. And in that moment, you can be saved. Right now, in fact, you can be saved. You can be saved. If that is you and you've never come to that place in your life, I want to ask you just in the comments, if you're watching on Facebook Live, would you just type into those comments, God, I'm lost. With great wisdom and humility and courage. Would you type that in? God, I'm lost. You're just owning the fact that in the middle of this wilderness experience, you need an instructor to save you, to guide you. That instructor is named Jesus Christ, and he wants to save you. And he wants to give you his Spirit to guide you. God, I'm lost. Now, some of you have prayed that before. In fact, you remember that season of life. It was a past wilderness experience, no doubt. And you prayed that, and God came to your rescue through God's Son, Jesus Christ. And so for you, I want to encourage you to, instead of typing in, God, I'm lost, that you would instead type in, God, I'm listening. For you, you are an Elijah. And right now, you are in the wilderness. And right now, God is inviting you to crawl up onto his lap, for your ear to be tuned in to his voice, to his whisper, like never before in your life. God, I'm listening. Right now, I believe God wants to leverage this sovereign pause for our ears to hear with clarity like never before the one who really knows. The voice that can lead us not only in the wilderness, but through the wilderness, so that we come out of the wilderness more transformed than when we first went in. God, I'm listening. Would you type that in to the comments? Our band is going to play a song right now. In fact, we showed you this song at the end of the year. It was right on New Year's Eve. And so many of us back then, we were planning for a new decade, and we had in our mind how amazing, the start of the year was going to be. No one anticipated this. But we sang this song at the very end of the year, and we're about to play it for you. And the reason we're going to play this song for you is because it talks about how there is one name, how Jesus Christ is exalted above all things, how his voice is the voice, not just a voice, but the voice for you and for me in the wilderness. And so as you're thinking through everything that you've heard over the past 20 minutes, I would encourage you to listen to these words or sing along with these words. Perhaps get on your knees, maybe stand to your feet, exalted over